Today's conversation is going to be a powerful one, and we can't thank all of you on Zoom enough for being here with us. And for anyone else who's listening to this in the future, there's a reason why your lives and our lives have intersected at this moment in time. So our speaker here today is Kenneth Charles Pierson, known as Ken Pierson, or to many is known as KC over there on the West Coast. And what I want to say about him before we hand it over to him is I have watched this man. He walked into this museum a little over a year ago with a dream on his heart to someday produce a documentary and a movie about the life of Walter Russell, because this was a man who was inspired by Walter and Lao Russell. He is in his 30th year as a student of the Russell teachings. He has been a beacon in the recovery community, which I'll share with you in just a moment. He spent 25 years doing production work for Disney. He's the proud father of one dad. And mostly I want you to know that this is a man who understands the Russell work at a deeper level than what many do, because he has lived the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And I have watched the heart and the amount of energy, thought energy, that he has poured into the recovery world. In fact, what we've done is we've gifted everyone a booklet of some of his inspired writings, and we will share that with Michaela to upload in the Zoom as well. And I wanted to mention to you that being that he is very well known on the West Coast, this is his first time here on the East Coast and the first time with us here at the University of Science and Philosophy. And I wanted to mention two things. One is that he actually, if we could turn that down a little bit, this was a leader in the recovery community, Dr. Drew Pinsky, where he said, "I've had the opportunity to observe his interaction with peers. He's an inspiration to others and commands a unique capacity to communicate the most nuanced concepts in recovery. His work has been exceptionally helpful to many of my clients." And also another one from a Denise Klein, the owner of a particular recovery center in Malibu, and said, "Ken is compelling, knowledgeable, and extremely passionate about helping people. He has been an amazing asset to the recovery field in Malibu, California. His energy is unlimited, and he will go above and beyond the call of duty. His psychoeducation material is valuable to everyone, not just addicts, as it addresses common thinking errors that affect people's thinking and behavioral patterns." It is with much joy that I introduce the other half of my heart. Please join me in welcoming Ken Pierson.
All right. Wow. Thank you very much, Kimberly Faith, the other half of my heart. We met here at this museum a little over a year ago, well, I won't go into that. That'll get me all mushy. So what we will go into is I want to talk about addictionism and what that means and represents today. And the reason that God gave me that insight of calling it addictionism is because alcoholism can sometimes be a little bit of a turnoff to some people that that didn't drink too much, because of the current society in terms of drugs that are going on today are much more advanced. You've got fentanyl that's just rampant. You can't even find heroin anymore on the streets. You know, I deal with these people, and they get heroin, but it's laced with fentanyl. So it's like that bad of an epidemic. And, you know, I want to read a little bit, too, from Lao. She had talked about, Lao and Walter, in the home study course in Unit 8. Talks about, even in the 1950s, the epidemic of alcohol and drugs and what it was doing to our society. And so here we are 73 years later, and think of, in the last 75 years, mankind has progressed more in 75 years than it has since the dawn of consciousness up to 1950. So that's how much we've accelerated. And so in terms of that, addictionism, and why I call it that, because it covers a full spectrum of an injured brain. And I don't want to say mind, because we're in this situation at the University of Science and Philosophy. So mind is an element that is the centering between the left and right lobe of the brain, the pineal gland. And then we have our souls, which I believe is kind of in our hearts. That's where our feeling center is, and the heart works in a very interesting way. But I want to get into a little bit about addictionism and what it is and what I found out for me in my recovery. I had gotten sober 33 years ago. The qualifier would be that I had 7 driving under suspended driver's licenses and 5 DUIs. by the time I was 27. So that's my qualifier. I'm not really a big drunk-a-lot guy, but I am a recovery guy. So what happened for me is I got sober, and when I got sober, the novelty of being sober wore off after a short period of time. I call it 90-day wonder. And after about 90 days of being sober, for me, I felt something was missing. And a year in of recovery means I didn't do any drugs or alcohol. I was going to a lot of AA meetings, 12-step meetings. And I wasn't hearing what I needed to hear to kind of fill up that hole anymore. And the hole started expanding. So the only place I felt comfortable was in meetings. But meetings are designed to teach us how to live in the world that we're in, and to get grounded in a new moral compass. And that it's not a moral conflict, because if it was, we would have stopped a long time ago, because trouble happens for most addicts and alcoholics long before we get into recovery. And it's circumstantial that we get sober. I got sober. For me, it was circumstance, 5 DUIs and jail. And I was 45 days sober, and I decided to run from the police on a motorcycle. That was one of my sober adventures. And that's one of the things I found out in recovery is drunk, and what makes an addict and an alcoholic is they're this same wacko sober that they are when they're drinking. They just don't have the drunken or the druggy behavior, but they have the erratic mind. And that's where, for me, I got into the Walter Russell message by reading The Man Who Tapped the Secrets of the Universe. And I found that in 95. I got sober in 91. So it was 4 years into my recovery, and it became the on-ramp to relationship with God within, as opposed to, for me, I always saw people point out, God be with me, and I always heard God had a great sense of humor, or God was playing with me, and I always think, God, the way we think of God objectively as opposed to personally. So in terms of that, I found out for me that the man that I was and that I brought to sobriety was not going to change by myself. I lacked power to manifest that change. And I needed a method, which we call the 12 steps in recovery. That's the methodology. And I can't even apply that method without a power helping me. So this kind of an introduction to what this disease is on step 1. It talks a little bit about that. And it goes, there's 12 steps. So step 1 talks about what I'm up against as a person trying to get into recovery. And it says in here, it says that there is, they said, no such thing as a personal conquest of the compulsion by the unaided will. It means that by in and of myself, I couldn't recover. Relentlessly deepening my dilemma, I was pointed out that increasing sensitivity to drugs and alcohol. They called it a tyrant, and it wielded a double-edged sword over me. First, I'm smitten by an insane urge to condemn me to go on drinking. So what happens when you become an addict or an alcoholic and you cross that line is you get this mental obsession. And you don't even know where it comes from, because it's become visceral. Visceral means, well, the same place where the instincts lie. I'll get into that later in a second. And that's what makes an alcoholic and a drug addict a drug addict. It's gone from the frontal cortex to the midbrain to the visceral, right? And so it's natural to get high or drink. It's unnatural to not get high or drink once you cross that line. And so when you stop, what you have left is all the reasons why you drink and why you use drugs. And therefore, you're kind of nuts. To say, and you're sober nuts. So you're wondering, wait a minute, the novelty, but God gives you this grace of 3 months or so, maybe 6 months for some, I don't know. For me, it was about 3 months. And I would really notice a year in, a grace period of just being clean for me was a novelty. And I felt really good about it. But I didn't change. I went into these 12-step meetings, and I was still the same guy. I was just now sober. And being that same guy, I had a mind that I would refer to. In terms of that, I found out for me in recovery that the average human being has 70,000 thoughts a day. So I know for me that I got taught by my first mentor to look at this double-edged sword. And then it says in here about that mental obsession, it's coupled with a physical allergy. That means once I put the drug or the alcohol, once I have that, I'm allergic to it. So it has this compulsion that I can't stop. Now that's addictionism. And it doesn't matter whether it's pornography, social media, our phones. You know that 95% of all people first thing in the morning look at their phones today? So if that isn't addiction, I don't know what is, right? So there's addiction around us all the time. So addictionism is now when something happens where it's starting to disrupt my life. And the idea of stopping it it creates a reaction inside me, an anxiety. How am I going to live without it? How did I get here? I could do this, but the reality of it is you can have, just by quitting, can create severe reaction because you're dealing now with all those issues that you've been stuffing with that drugs and alcohol. There's underlying trauma. Most alcoholics or drug addicts come from a traumatized family life. Not all. Some come from great families, which is the riddle of this disease called ism. And what makes it, so it's important for me to understand the ism means it's happening right now. Criticism, racism, communism, if you will. It means it's active right now. It's alive. The disease of addictionism is alive. It's a malady of the mind. A malady means the disease of the mind. That is in step one also, is that once the malady is planted into the person in recovery, they'll never be the same. And the malady being that, drunk or not, I still have this broken mind, this broken brain. And I refer to it and live through it all the time. My story's in there. And a lot of times in recovery, you hear a lot about drinking and drugs. And that's kind of, I drank this way, I did drug this way. It's called a drug-a-log. And for me, I found recovery early on, luckily by the grace of God, my first mentor, which led me to the man who tapped the secrets of the universe in a sales box in a place called the Psychic Eye. So, I mean, the box was this big and it had a bunch of pamphlets in it. And this one book stood out at me. I got the George Washington Carver stood out at me, and also The Man Who Tapped the Secrets of the Universe. And I picked up The Man Who Tapped the Secrets of the Universe, and the rest didn't matter at that point. And I sat there and read the whole book just standing there. And I had a business meeting in 20 minutes, but I was late because I just couldn't stop reading. Once I found those 5 fundamental laws of success, which are, the humility, reverence, joy, deep purpose, and inspiration. Those things mean something or they don't, right? They're just words. I found out if I don't apply them to my life, which really means to my mind in the moment I'm in, then I'm going to be the same man sober that I was when I was drinking and using. And you see that a lot. And in recovery, oh, there we go. There's that thinking process. So up here you can see a calm thought. The top one would be kind of a natural, a wave, a balanced thought. The second one would be maybe an active but balanced thinking mind. And the third one represents chaos, right? And that's my past will be my future if I keep referring to it. And in addictionism, we have a tendency to live in our past, constantly referring to what happened when I was a child, what happened when I was getting loaded. And so the problem is that reactivates cell memory, right? The brain records that are there. And when they activate, with them comes emotion. So I found out in recovery through this message of the University of Science and Philosophy and Walter Russell was thought, feeling, action. That's how human beings work. At 70,000 thoughts a day, I mean, can you track the ones you've had in the last hour? It's roughly 1,500. Can you remember 1,500 thoughts in the last hour for yourself? So I know for me right away that lack of power, that's my dilemma. There's no way I can track that many thoughts. And they're injurious. So what I can do is track my feelings, though. And that's what feelings are for, to help me to register what my thought life has been today, right now, up to this moment. So if you feel good, you're probably having some good thoughts. And if you feel bad, you're probably having some bad thoughts. Not probably. For me, it was an absolute, right? Thought, feeling, action. And then I have this other thing that I'm up against, we're going to get to in a little bit, called the instincts. It's instinctually natural for a drug addict and alcoholic to get loaded. It's become an instinct, right? So you've taken and transformed something in the visceral part of your brain that wasn't meant to be transformed. I also found out, Dr. Drew had shared this with me, that 85% of all alcoholics and drug addicts have a protein within the visceral part of their brain that's a high driving mechanism. That's why there's a statement in recovery that alcoholics and drug addicts have a higher earning potential than most when they use that drive correctly. So it's that desire to drive race cars, excitement, the things extremes. And I think that nature does that so we break the mold all the time. And so here you have this group of people that are really smart. Most alcoholics and drug addicts, quite frankly, can be very intelligent people if they use their brain and their mind correctly and be taught to. The most important thing is all about a new character. It's all about building a new character with no reference to the old. And in that 12th step, the very last one, it says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. So that means the prior 11 steps, something has happened. You had a spiritual awakening, which is another way of saying, I have a new way of thinking, feeling, and acting. And it's come from the first 6 steps are all about this old character and finding out how it operates. An inventory is for the purpose of discovering the thought life. And I don't even think they knew that back then, but that's exactly what happens. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in a second when I get to instincts. Right now, what I'm trying to do is get across about this disease. It is a disease. It is a mental illness. It doesn't mean we're crazy or people who are addicts or alcoholics are crazy at all. Matter of fact, many good people manage it. It's called manageable alcoholic. Drink alcoholically, but show up at work and they don't miss things. Alcoholics and drug addicts have a tendency to crash and burn and circumstantially end up like me in recovery. Some people, what they call, manage their drinking or their drugs, but the reality of it is there's still that trauma inside. They're still blocking something. And if you take that drugs and alcohol away, what you have left is a broken thinking mind and an inability to access something greater than themselves. That's why in recovery, step 2 says we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. The reason it's a power and not God is because most people come in with a God that's broken. So you have to reconceptualize God, which we will talk about the omnis at the end of this, of what that means, which came from this message at the University of Science and Philosophy of the 3 omnis. And so what happened for me is I read the Anecdote, the Secrets of the Universe. That led me to come out here in 98 and come to a twilight meeting at the Holiday Inn for a weekend. And I got to wrap it up here. So in wrapping it up and summarizing it is recognizing I have a mental illness and that in and of myself, I lack the power to identify it, treat, expose it, right? So I can admit I got a problem, but I can't accept it. And that's where the difference between admit and accept comes in. Sounds like I know. I read admit, right? The first step says, who cares to admit complete defeat? In terms of that, admit seems to me like understandable, right? But when you look in the dictionary, it's something done with reluctance. So when they wrote that first step, they knew that you were going to come in here saying, oh, I'm ready, I've whooped, I've been beat. But there's reluctance still until you accept your devastating weakness and all its consequences. Of real happiness will know none at all. This is in the first step. So in terms of that acceptance, right, that's an act of our own will. In order to have that relationship with God, it's going to be an act of my will to seek what that means and learn from others. How do you connect? So we're going to move on to the second phase. We got 4 phases of this workshop we're doing right now. And the second phase, oh, there's the instincts. Okay. There's the instincts. So now, as I was saying, so this is a quote from Walter Russell and from the home study course. Even the genius mind who becomes addicted in excess is unable to express his genius until a stimulation of the drug allows him to become aware of the light in him for just a short interval. The addictionism, which is my term and what we're talking about, which was not in the home study course, calls loudly to his senses and he reaches out for the drug to which his body is enslaved. And that is, in fact, what it is. That's what the allergy of the body is enslaved. Once you put anything that represents addictionism, let's say, drugs, alcohol, pornography, social media, people are addicted to stealing, believe it or not. And a lot of that stuff, when people get in recovery, comes out. Food becomes a big one in recovery, right? You can't use drugs and alcohol. So what pleasures you? Food. And these primary instincts, which we're going to get into right now, have a big point of what happens. They've been aberrated. And that's truly what happens to an alcoholic and drug addict is their instincts, and there's 3 primary instincts. I'm going to read from, this is out of the 12 and 12, and then I'm going to read a little bit out of the home study course and the Divine Iliad, of course. But this is what instincts are all about in recovery, right? Creation gave us instincts for a purpose. Without them, we wouldn't be complete human beings. So it helps to realize what is these instincts. If men and women didn't exert themselves to be secure in the person, so there's three primary instincts. That's sex, security, and society, all right? This will break down. So if men and women didn't exert themselves to be secure in their persons, made no effort to harvest food or construct shelter, there would be no survival. That's the security instinct. So it's natural and God-given. If they didn't reproduce, the earth wouldn't be populated. We call that sexual instinct, right? And if we were not social, if there were no social instinct, if men cared nothing for society of one another, there would be no society. So these desires for sex relations, for material and emotional security. So security is twofold. There's the material security, and then there's emotional security, and they directly correlate. So when you're broke, you become emotionally insecure. If you stay in that broke state, it'll create emotional insecurity. And so, that's why we strive so much for that materialism, because it gives a false sense of security, which is not in God. It's in the materialism that you possess. So yet these instincts, so necessary for my existence, often far exceed their proper function. That's what happens to an addict and an alcoholic. They start to exceed, and that what happens is distortion, and it warps you. And powerfully, blindly, many times subtly, right? Subtly, meaning that you don't know about them. They drive us, dominate us, insist upon ruling our lives for sex. So our desire for sex, for material and emotional security, and for an important place in society often tyrannize us. This is all human beings. This is not just addicts and alcoholics. There are many people that are workaholics. Well, what do you think is driving them? It's the security instinct. And they use fear to show up at work. A lot of successful corporate people that I've dealt with use fear as a motivator, right? So they work extra hours because they're afraid if they don't, then the boss or the business won't work, and then they'll be broke and they'll end up on the street. Every fear leads to death. There's only two fears in life. The fear I'm not going to get what I want, or the fear I'm going to lose what I already possess. It's in here in print. I just don't want to go to it right now. But there's only two fears. There's unlimited forms of derivatives of that fear, kind of like there's unlimited waves of the ocean, but there's only one ocean, right? Ocean is one idea. The waves, each wave is different, but those waves represent, almost like human beings, an expression. It's still from the ocean. So it's of the ocean. It never leaves the ocean. It only seems to be separate, but it really isn't separate. If you think of a calm ocean and you stick your finger in it, right, you could not pull your finger out and then put your finger back in and find the exact location. You're still touching the whole ocean, not just part of it, whole of it. It's just one idea. The shore is another idea. Trees are an idea. The birds are one idea, right? There's many forms of bird, but there's only one idea behind birds. There's many forms of trees, but there's only one idea behind trees. I think we all know what that is, right? Oxygen and carbon dioxide. That's the interaction there. So I'm going to finish this up on the instincts here. And this is the most important. When thus out of joint, man's natural desires cause him great trouble. Practically all the trouble there is. That's the recovery's way of saying, when they say practically, that means all of us. It's just if they don't leave any loopholes, right? Otherwise people would get out. Well, I don't always do that, right? So this is important, the way this is structured and written. I know that this was another thing that was written. God was pushing this pencil because man could not construct this. Just like the Divine Iliad and Walter talks about, he could not have written that, and he wrote that in a manner, we'll talk a little bit more about that it clearly was of the illumination of God. But anyway, practically all the trouble there is. No human being, however good, is exempt from these troubles. No human being, not alcoholic and drug addict, no human being is exempt from these troubles. This is the most important part. Nearly every serious emotional problem you have can be seen as a misdirected instinct. When that happens, the great natural assets, the instincts, have turned into physical and mental liabilities. So those instincts for sex, security, and society, you don't think about it, right? Instinctually. My girl keeps telling me to flip my hair. It's a little up there. Everybody looking good. Anyway, instincts for sex and security and society are important to recognize in recovery and for all human beings. This is another thing I want to read in terms of what I'm reading from and why it's not just for addicts and alcoholics, and it's here on page 16. It talks about what this is, who this is for. It says, In here it says, many people, non-alcoholic, report that as a result, there's Al-Anon, there's Alateen, there's all kinds of places that are many people that are not alcoholics and drug addicts report as a result of the practice of the AA steps, they have been able to practice the 12 steps, meet other difficulties of life. They think that the 12 steps can mean more than sobriety for problem drinkers. They see them as a way of happy and effective living for many, alcoholic or drug addict or not. So it's telling you it's for anybody and everybody. In terms of that, oh boy, God, time flies, doesn't it? So these instincts, once they get warped, right? Every alcoholic and addict I've met, and I've met quite a few, have some kind of issue with sex, security, and society. And what that inventory process is, which is a big part of recovery, is learning how do I function? Why does my brain go in the gutter? See, I got a mind that's never satisfied. I always want more. I get a new car, 90 days later, I want new wheels and rims. I see someone with a great sound system, you know what I mean? Now I want that sound system. But when I first got the car, it was perfect. I loved it. Man, it's great. I'm so content. And then all of a sudden, I need more, right? That happened for me with women. 90 days, they were great. 91 days later, I started seeing, wrinkles and pimples and things I didn't like. And I do that with people. People are great. I get a friend. 91 days later, I start seeing their flaws. And I don't realize it's because I got this mind that defends itself. And the way it defends itself is tear the world down and make it a bad place. So that's why I'm so messed up. I live in blame, right? And one of the principles in recovery is we have to remove blame from our thought and our speech. And that's all about balance, which it talks about here in the Divine Iliad, where we have to, it's nobody's fault. And so many times we come up and oh God, why are you doing this to me? And I always laugh and go, so God stops the cosmic clock for me, right? To only deal with me, test me, or has a great sense of humor for me. But everybody else is just on hold while God's messing with me. You see what kind of mentality that is? And it realizes that that's not the way God's laws are already set. That's like saying I can ask God to eliminate gravity or add more gravity. And gravity is a law. It's one of the laws of nature that we have to live by whether we like it or not. So in here, Walter talks about without any exception, those who have broken law have been equally broken by the law. Well, alcoholics and drug addicts and people with addictionism are violating the law of balance, the law of rhythmic balance interchange in your own life, right? That law of a peaceful mind. Why can't I think good thoughts about you when I meet you or see you? Why can't I see your assets? Why can't I take inventory? Why I have this ability to find out what's wrong with anything or anybody. I can take everybody's inventory in the room in 5 minutes. And I know and I only see your flaws, right? I live in a world where, oh my God, we could use that scale. Do we have that scale image? I think we didn't bring it, did we? The scale, the give and take. That we didn't because it had take on there instead of re-given. So, but anyway, if you take the scale of life and you look at in terms of how your thoughts are, how you feel, it helps you to register what's going on. So when you got a mind that's not satisfied, you start to live in a world that's not a good world anymore, a world full of flaws, people that aren't right. I get in freeway traffic and I'm a civil engineer and thinking how they should have designed the freeways differently. This is ridiculous. It's bottlenecked. They're creating traffic jams. Why are they doing that? I look at, I go into anywhere and I find what's wrong, It's the 12 roses, one is ugly and 11 are beautiful, but I only see the ugly one. That is part of addictionism. That's part of an injured mind, right? Seeing 11 beautiful roses is a virtuous moral character. And that's what needs to be built in recovery, is a new character. And in order to do that, we have to expose those instincts and how much sex has hurt me, right? We all got sexual secrets, right? Think about that for a second within your own self that you don't want to talk about. And yet you need to, right? No more secrets is a part of recovery. You got to get your secrets out. And, I've heard so many inventories and secrets that I'll never forget when my first mentor, I told him my secrets. He fell asleep on me. And I was so reluctant to say it all, right? I didn't want to say it. He fell asleep and realized, man, it didn't mean anything. It was me that gave it weight, my secrets, and thought that that I couldn't tell anybody. And once I got them out, then all of a sudden there's this common denominator happens. When I don't have any more secrets, I connect to all human beings. It's hard to see us all as one, but if you can see the ocean as one, right? Think of it flat again. And now you see man and woman, we're one. We're one. We are all one. All birds are one. All trees are one. All human beings are one. And that's why we hear in this message from the University of Science and Philosophy and the Russell's work is that when we hurt one man, we hurt all man. And that means man and woman, not just man. And when we help one man or woman, we help all mankind. We are all one. It's hard to see that, but here's the best way I can correlate it for you. Imagine someone going down the ocean and living for 20 years on a boat. Then you bring them back into the land. What do they call that? What happens to them after a little while? They get land fever. And they want to go back on the ocean. They weren't born on the ocean, but they think the ocean is my home. This is where I live. They've been patterned by it, right? Because they spent time around it. So that's the thing, that we're all patterned by our environment. It doesn't mean we live there, we're born there. We're just patterned by it. But because everything is trying to become every other thing at the speed of 186,000 miles per second. That's what we call the speed of light, which Walter Russell refers to as the speed of reproduction, the echo effect, if you will. Everything is trying to become every other thing at that speed. So you're not born in the ocean. You've been patterned by it because it becomes a part of you, and you become a part of it the more you're there. Same thing, right? You hang out with dogs, you're probably going to get fleas. You hang out with lower characters, your character's going to get dropped. Walter talks about that in the Divine Iliad, and talks about how it's all about character. And in the home study course, Leo writes down about, the moral compass being off, and that's exactly what it is. But it's not about rebuilding. It's about a new character. And that's what life is about, right? When I hit a wall and it isn't working out, and I've reached a point of unhappiness, there's a stage at which this happens. There's a sign of emotional insecurity. I never knew that it came in stages. Just like the way I'm going to get to know God is 3 steps, right? We'll talk about that in a second. But the stages of insecurity are worry, then comes anger, right? If you worry long enough about something, you get moody in life. And then so you add anger. Now you got worry and anger working together. Then all of a sudden you add worry and anger, you feel self-pity. Poor me. You get into that martyrdom. It's like, why is it so hard for me? Why are other people getting things and I'm not? How come you're benefiting and I'm not? Thus comes self-pity. Now you add worry, anger, self-pity together and you get depression. So you don't just fall into depression. You're not bipolar. There's a stage that's getting you there, right? But we use these terms. I never forget a doctor said, you got IBS, which means we don't know what the hell it is, but you got stomach issues. And the same thing with ADD, NDD, all these acronyms. Really, I'm sorry. Bipolar is like, it's a part of an emotional trauma that it needs to be exposed and can be exposed as you build a new character that doesn't have bipolar. You weren't born bipolar, right? You became bipolar. You weren't born ADD. You became ADD. You weren't born whatever acronym you want to use. You became that. So in order for that to change, though, you think about it, the change needs to happen on a visceral level, which is why it requires this relationship with a power greater than any human power, which we call God in step 3 in recovery, where it says we made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood him. And understood is very important. It's like ism. Understood means it's ongoing. I don't understand God. It's understood that my will is in alignment with God's will, and that this is what I'm going to attempt to start to do in my life as a foundation. And it tells me in that particular step that the whole rest of life and recovery is dependent on how well I apply that principle of making the decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood him to be the power for my life from step 2. So every step leads to the other, right? Step 3 doesn't need step 2 anymore. Step 4 doesn't need 3. That's how it moves. And so, but each feeds the other, right? I need to be in 2 to get to 3. I need to be in 3 to get to 4, etc., up to 11. We're having had a spiritual awakening. Oh, all right. We're into balance now. Right on. Here we go. So now we're going to go on Divine Iliad. So we're going to talk about what is recovery, right? How do I get into recovery? What does that start to look like? It's I got to start to have more balance in my life. And I got to stop living in erratic emotions. It tells us in step 4 that we are the victims of erratic emotions. We can see them quickly in others, but only slowly in ourselves, right? See, I can pick up erratic emotions because I'm riddled with them. So I can see them in you quickly, and I'll judge you for it, right? That's the toss pot calling the kettle black, right? Throwing rocks at a glass house. Addictionism lives that way because we're hiding something. And so we must see your failings because we feel so insecure and low about ourselves. That's why we're riddled with insecurities. And we end up depressed type of people, right? Bipolar. We're either the loud, noisy person or we're completely shut down. It's always extremes. That's an indicator of addictionism, is when you have extremes in your life. Thank you. And so in terms of that, I want to read from the Divine Iliad a couple more passages about balance and how we get this and what happens when you don't live according to rhythmic balance interchange. RBI, that's something from the university that you need to get the books to understand, but most people who have been around here know what that means because it's a moral compass, rhythmic balance interchange. If I just use that formula in all my interactions, whether it's social, personal, or business, it doesn't matter. It's about equal exchange. It's never about getting more, and it's never about taking. And I had to learn that I was a taker. Addictionism is a taker. You're a taker. You affect everybody around you in your addictionism or your alcoholism, right? You're taking. People love you, and now you're going downhill. And guess what? It's a lot easier to pull someone down than it is to pick someone up, especially if they're not willing. Willingness is the key to change. We have to be willing and understand what that means. And we're going to take it back, but willingness always brings us back. And willingness to understand, I've taken it back, God, I'm sorry. So I had to learn to invite God into my mind, and that's what created balance. I said, I don't know who you are or how to relate to you, and I've had many experiences. I won't get too far into that, but I had to start that way. That's what my first mentor taught me, is just start inviting God into your thought life. And when you see, and what happens is by that invitation, I started becoming aware of distorted thinking, of unreasoned distortions of judgment, aggressiveness, always looking at what's wrong. I got a scowl on my face, you know. You want to talk about tough? I'll show you tough, right? I got that attitude. But I don't got you want me to show you love? I'll show you love, right? That's the way I need to be. That's that new character, is becoming a giver instead of a taker. God, let's see here, it says in here, so we're broken by the law. Good, bad, evil. This is from the Law of Balance in Divine Iliad 1. Good, bad, evil, success, or failure are not qualities of nature, right? Nature only loves. Nature only gives. It never takes. You know that trees are happy? Do you know that birds are happy? You ever seen an unhappy dog? Maybe they're grieving. They do grieve. We didn't even notice that. But most of the time you think about puppies, dogs are always really happy. Birds are always chirping. They're happy, right? The trees are happy. The plants around you are happy. Everything in nature is happy. And the reason it's happy is because it's always maintained rhythmic balance interchange. Nature can never take more than it gives. So to simulate nature, when I want to get to know God, I got to start going into nature to feel those rhythms. And the reason that the waterfall and the mountains or the beach or wherever it is you go that you tap into is because you're tapping into rhythmic balance interchange. And it's infectious, just like a negative person is infectious. Toxicity is infectious. Addictionism is infectious, right? And it doesn't matter what you do. We talk about now with these kids, if I had grown up with the ability to get on that online and get pornography, I'm telling you, I would be a mess. In terms of that, I already had to deal with sexual stuff as I changed the character that I had become. But reality of it is today we have an epidemic called pornography. And the kids are getting hooked on it fast. And what's happening is these younger generations are stoic. You ever know? There's no emotion. They're just dead inside. And the reason is because pornography desensitizes you. That's why they can't. And then they get in a relationship and meet a nice girl or a nice guy, and they can't enter into a relationship because they're desensitized. They don't know how to have sex without pornography. So this is something that gets introduced into the relationship, and now you both become hooked on pornography in order to achieve that ultimate goal that we like to achieve in our sexual interchange. So in terms of that, I had to realize that right now it's like this is something worth noticing, just like the epidemic of these phones. We're all addicted to this stuff. We're addicted to digital media, some form or another. Except if we learn to keep things in balance, then we don't have to be addicted. It's always recognizing, I'm doing this too much. I need to back off. That's what's called a moral compass. This is something that addicts and alcoholics lack. And that's what the new character is about. It's about building a character that's a giver, not a taker, that lives by ethical codes, which really starts from step 7 to 12. Those are all about the new character, right? The old character is about 1 through 6, and 7 through 12 all about building a new character. Step 7 says, we humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings, right? And what we're humbly, now humility is being introduced. The basic ingredient of all humility is the desire to seek and do God's will. That comes out of step 7. So that principle means that now I've become a character that's desiring God's will, not before I asked for God because I needed God, because my mind would always go in the gutter and I would always worry about money. I would pick the wrong people sexually. I always entered in through the physical portal. And socially, I was always wondering if you were looking at me and how good I looked or how bad I looked or if I looked weird or didn't look weird. I was overly sensitive to social consciousness. So all 3 of those instincts became injured. And once they're injured, there's no one, it's like a warping of a wood, right? We have a warped mind. That's what alcoholics and drug addicts have. It talks about that. So restoring the balance here. Let me finish up here because I only got a minute. Misery inflicted by greed and selfishness is radared back to the giver of as misery. The law of love is absolute in nature. One cannot sin against God. God's universe of love is balanced. Man cannot upset God's balance. He can but upset his own. So how many times do we call, God, why are you doing this to me? I can't believe this is happening. God, this is terrible. Let me go. God, help me. God, oh, God, help me. Right? Everybody goes to jail. You know where people find God? Walter Russell shared about it. In isolation, and solitude is preferable. Isolation is jail. 98% of all guys who go to jail and women, the minute they get in there, go right to Jesus, right? And then when they get out, they leave Jesus in jail and they come back to that old character. That's how quick it returns. That's the ism, not a wasm, right? That's what it means. Ism means it's happening. It's never a wasm. Once you're injured, you are not going to be uninjured. You now carry that with you. I am one thought away from being that old character. One thought. One person does one thing, I'm one thought away. And it can happen on the freeway. It can happen in a business meeting. It can happen anywhere. One thought, and all of a sudden, I become a character that's that jagged line. I become that character. Okay, now we're going into thinking and balance. Oh, cool. Okay, so we did instincts. Cool. What? Oh, we're at the 4th stage? Woo. Oh, man. Time flies when you're having fun. All right. So I definitely recommend the Divine Iliad 1 and looking at the chapter on balance. It's really important for me. It was an important factor of learning how to start working with my mind. So the 3 omnis are also what I've got from Mr. Russell and Lao Russell. The Russells is omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent. Okay, instantly and timelessly. Oh, this is when he had his illumination. Instantly and timelessly knew the still undivided divine light of God, which is the fulcrum of life and power. Also, I knew the heartbeat of the divided light. So you got the undivided and the divided wave universe, which manifests love, life, power in matter. That's what we call duality. And I also knew that mind, which is undivided, and soul, which is undivided, and God, which is undivided, were one. Get it? Undivided. That's the only way they can become one, not 2. Invisible, omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, creator of all visible things in all the universe of mind, which God is. And that is exactly, for me, the stages of how I built a relationship with God. I started with omnipresence, right? And in omnipresence was the ocean. We'll start with the ocean, right? There we go. So there's the surface of the ocean, right? You look at that. Can anybody point to where the beauty is in that sunset and in that ocean? Can you point to it? Is there a place that would you say that's the beauty spot? That's the beauty spot? It isn't there because it's something you can know, but you can't see beauty, right? I love being in the ocean, but can you point to what I love about that ocean? You can't. I love the ocean. That's, again, an undividable quality. There's things that we can know, but we cannot see. And that which we see is the infinite complexity of duality, which we will never know, which is our bodies. You can see my body, but you don't know that I got a bad hip right now and I'm in pain, right? But I could tell you that. Now you know. You don't really know because you're not feeling the pain. You just hear the effect, right? Well, how deep, how far, how long? There's all kinds of levels you can go, and infinite complexity of just finding out what kind of pain that is. So omnipresent for me was that's nature, right? And nature is the prevalence of omnipresence. That's how I started to get to know and invite that omnipresence into my mind, right? Into my thought life. It's all about my thought life. That's why the company, my corporation, is called Thought Life Connection. And it's all about a thought life to me. In terms of that, that's again one of the Walter Russell lessons that I have learned about thought life and thought energy, right? And I put thought energy to getting to know the omnipresence of God. So when you see the surface of the ocean, you can feel that nature. You can see the beauty. Just looking at that, like, wow, man, look how pervasive God is. And you can't point to one spot where, beauty, love, truth, rhythm, balance, these are all qualities I can know, but I cannot see, right? And so I want to live in the knowing. I'm tired of living in the seeing, because the seeing is infinite. Duality goes on forever and ever. It's sort of like those mirrors in your bathroom. When you put that medicine cabinet, you open it up, and there's a mirror right there, and you see tons and tons of images. That's infinite complexity, but it's really the causation is one mirror hitting another mirror. That's the cause. And when you start to live in cause rather than effect, you start to have balance and know what that means in life. When someone's upset, you can look and say, well, did I cause that, or something's causing them to be disturbed right now? And maybe I can neutralize it rather than resist it, right? In the salutation today, it says that I shall meet impatience with patience, unkindness with kindness, and force I shall meet with gentleness. These are, I'm going to avoid it, right? If you're aggressive, my voiding is for me to be passive. If you're loving, it isn't about voiding. It's about loving and re-giving love, right? And you think about that. Love is strength. Love is true power. So for me, in order to get to the omniscient mind, right, I look at that ocean and I go below. And look at all that life that's below there. Each one of those is an idea. Each little fishy, each little coral is all idea. But it's only one idea, right? And that's the ocean. It's dividing the ocean, but it's not separate from the ocean. It is still part of the ocean, and therefore the idea of the ocean. So this one idea, I started contemplating, look at all that life down there. So the mind of God created that. That means God had to think up each fish, each coral, each piece. So that's a thought, right? Just like 70,000 thoughts a day. Lord knows how many God has, that's for sure. I don't think there's a limitation, right? Because God, within God, is all idea. Not one, all idea. It's like that ocean when you touch it. That's what the idea. So if you want to know something or learn something, I found out, all I got to do is start contemplating the idea behind a tree, right? What's the idea behind a tree? Everybody here knows that, right? The idea behind a tree is that tree radiates oxygen, and I breathe in oxygen for life, and I breathe out carbon dioxide for death. So life and death are all happening in the same moment. I desire death, you desire death, we all desire death just as much as we desire life, right? In breathing life, out breathing death. They're sequential and simultaneous at the exact same time. So really, death is not something to be afraid of. You're living in it all the time. When you go to sleep at night, you're not aware of your body. That's another way of saying you're dead. If you have no bodily awareness, then you have nothing left but consciousness. Consciousness never sleeps. That's the mind. The mind is always there. So we go from omnipresent, right, which is the surface, which is how I represent such beauty and such paramount. Then I go below the surface of the water and I see, man, idea created that. God's mind created all of that. That's beautiful. And then I look and I think, when I put the omnipresence and the omniscient together, I can now start to feel true power in life. I feel the sense of there's anything's possible when I tap into the mind of God. I can collect any idea I desire. All idea exists in one place, and that is in the mind of God. We are God. That's the riddle. Think of the drama of creation. How much time do I have left? 4 minutes? No. 4 minutes, huh? Gee, I don't feel like we should just sit here for 4 minutes and absorb everything that was said. Okay, omnipotence. So in terms of omnipotence, that's where I start to have power in life. And it's not my power. It's a power that I access by desiring to be one with my Creator, with God, with divine mind, with creation, whatever you want to call it, but it must be understood. I found out, and that's why step 3 talks about it must be understood by me, not you. I have to have a living God. That was my problem. I had heard about a praying God, right? You pray in the morning, you pray at night. In recovery here, I wake up in the morning and I ask God to keep me sober today, and I go to bed at night and I thank God for keeping me sober all day. And you wonder what the hell happened between morning and the night. That means the only thing left is me and this broken mind. I've asked God, but if I don't have a living God right here, right now, in this room with me, sharing, giving me the words to say, giving me the ideas behind what's being said, then I don't have it. If I'm not in recovery right now, then I don't have recovery. If I'm not happy right now, then you're not happy. It's always about the now. That's all you ever have. And in recovery, we learn that. We learn about how can I change? I do it right now. Don't worry about everything changing later. Just live in the now. Do the best you can for the change you can make right now. That's every human being. Work on being happy right now if you're not happy. How do I do that? I just said it. I can't capture those 70,000 thoughts, but what I can do is look at my feelings. My feelings are telling me the byproduct of the thoughts that I've been having. So like Sam, Mr. Spiker, always has such a wonderful countenance. That's the spirit within, because he's such a kind, loving man. So we know the thoughts that I believe and know that I tap into, the thoughts are loving and kind. And his wife is the same way. Man, Martha is just, these two are amazing people. Sam was the one that read that poem, the beginning of that poem. And, these two people have touched me. And I've been studying this message. I'm going to wrap it up with this. I've been studying this message for 30 years. And, here's power. So this is what we talk about, right? There's the calm ocean. Now, if that boat, right, hits that wave, those waves are still that calm ocean. Without that calm ocean, those waves don't exist. Those waves can only happen from that stillness. That's called equilibrium of life. That is where God lies. God lies in stillness, not in motion. Motion is effect and stillness is cause. Sound comes from silence. Motion comes from rest, not the other way around. So what this is helping me to understand is that when I go through these extremes in life, I run the risk of tipping over, or I can run a balanced life. And you can see how the boat goes up and down and over the waves, and it's big enough. A big enough wave can take that boat and break it in half, right? And it has many waves around it, but you can't say which wave broke that boat in half. You can't identify it. It's just super wavy out there on the ocean, right? You can't say which wave actually broke it, because they're all working together to turn that boat over if that's what happens. A tidal wave is accumulation of many little waves gradually getting momentum, and that can be a shock wave effect. It can happen from an earthquake, but it starts with a rumble, and then that rumble becomes a wave, and then it mounts and builds until it releases, right? And thus, this is the same thing in life is power is rest. That's where I got to get to rest. It's quieting down those 70,000 thoughts. I lack power to do that. I lack God if I don't access God right now. It's always about now, right? I got to bring God. I walk through every door. I don't have to. I know that I'm bringing God with me. I'm not looking for God. God's coming with me. I drive a car with God, except when you turn in front of me without your signal, then sometimes I depart from God and go back to that old character. I'm joking. That is a little bit of a joke. This is where I realize that, God is unchanging. The undivided universe is where all power is. The unconditioned universe, and it sounds confusing, but if you really look at this, right, I start to live in truth and love, and that gives me some power. And that truth and love that I'm starting to live in, which means I'm learning to be self-honest to self. I'm telling on my mind to advisors when I go in the gutter. I've been having a bad thought life lately. My thoughts taking me down. Now I'm getting to the truth of who I am and what's causing that. The effect of being depressed has nothing to do with the cause. The cause is where the treatment comes from. I got to find out what's causing that. The truth set me free, right? Why would it? We're talking self-honesty, self-truth. We're not just talking about saying the truth and about the fact that I took money or didn't take money, or you gave me too much change, or that's all good stuff, don't get me wrong. But we're talking about self-honest to self, and imagine that for a second. Can you be self-honest to yourself? That is a skill learned. That's something I had to learn. With that comes love. Love for what? To realize everybody has a little off day. Everybody can go a little haywire. So I start to understand love within myself, realizing I go off sometimes. But I can always come back to God. I can always invite God back into my mind. Hey, God, I used to use triggers when I first started. I would, every doorway I walked through, I would say, hey, God, be with me now. And my mentor, he was a mechanic, and he would say he'd had to check his watch every 10 to 15 minutes for the timing, right? And he would check, if he hadn't checked in with God, when they looked at that watch, that would be his trigger. Find triggers. I had to find triggers that awaken that invite God in. Everywhere I go, not just one place. So those triggers become real important. Those are triggers of love. And when I tap into God, I'm no longer upset. That worry goes away. That scattered, jagged line of my mind starts to become a rhythmic, balanced mind by just inviting God in, which God is love and light. Right? The light is what creates duality. Love is the cause of that creation, the expression of love. So when I live in truth, I now can find love. Love gives me power. Power then motivates me for more. I want more. I can only get more through knowledge. I got to educate myself. You got to become a reader. You got to start contemplating. This quick read stuff is for the birds, man. They're talking about now that you can't even capture someone for 3 seconds online. Otherwise, if you don't get a hook on them, they're gone. All these young people, they just want a synopsis. Just give me just give me the down low. I don't need the whole rhetoric. And there's the difference between quality versus quantity. It's a qualitative conversation versus a quantitative conversation. They see it as too much. Just give me the facts. Just the facts. That's not knowledge. Knowledge then, think about truth, love gives me power. Power gives me the desire for knowledge. Once I have knowledge, I start to have a balanced life. Once I have a balanced life, my spirit becomes now the driving force for my life. That spirit that I've always wanted to express, that spirit of the dreams, to play music, to become an artist, those things I couldn't think I could do because it wasn't in my blood or DNA or in my family were all lies. Da Vinci and Mozart, that wasn't in their blood or family. They desired to know music. We all have that capacity. That's the truth. And that spirit allows me now to enter my mind, right? My mind can now be a tool to do productive things. And thus, all of a sudden, when I add all that together, I start to realize my Father and I are one. That's what it means, is how we find God as oneness, is we build it. It doesn't just happen because we say it. We have to live it. We live in truth and love. That gives us power. Power gives us desire for knowledge. Knowledge creates balance. Balance creates more awareness in my spirit and my mind to be at one with God, the fulcrum of life. So now I live in the God mind, no longer the sensed mind, the sense self mind. We all have that within us, right? You think about what separates the left side and the right side from your brain. We call it an equator. Well, that's where God is. God is in that equatorial line in everything in life. Male, female. You would call, when you put life and death together, what do you get? You get endless repetitions of cycles. And the same thing happens everywhere in the world that we live in. Everything is duality, right? And it's always male, female. The God mind is singular. Getting there is a building process. And that's probably the best way I can say it. I think we're going to end on that. That's pretty good there. Okay, there is a definite relation between the addictionism, or replacing it with alcoholism, of a community and its intellectual decay. Addictionism, we are decaying our younger generation. I live in Charlottesville, anyway, and you look at these kids, I walk around the campus, they never look up. They all got headphones on. They walk around, they never look up. You can't, there's no hi, hey, how you doing? It just blows me away. I'm sitting there, I tell Kimberly, how is this younger generation, nobody that says hi, there's no human connection anymore. Where did it go? What happened? People are the most important thing in life. All we got is people. You know what we leave with? The relationships we had in life. We do not leave with the U-Haul, right? There's no U-Haul on your casket, right? You don't get to take all this stuff. It's just clay of earth, and it will remain clay of earth. All of that you have. So what you end up leaving with is the people you love and care about. That's why people are so important. Why, when we get to that third cycle in life, people and love become important in relationships. Well, don't wait till the cycle. Start young, man. I've been working on this since midlife, since my early 30s. I've been working and trying to live by the principle of love, and the key to life is personal relationships. That's how I can meet people that are wonderful. I sit in a room full of people that are my family. I'm from the West Coast, and my family's been on the East Coast the whole time. It just took me a minute to get here, about 30 years, but I made it, right? And in those 30 years, I lived this message through the grace of God and by myself. It's not about other people. It's about your application, and it's about your desire to become more and better. And therefore, how can I become more and better if I don't have a relationship with the one undivided God that's understood by me, not you? That's the importance of that. That's it.
Relax.